Hi, my name is Alex Smith. I have the privilege of being the lead pastor here at the Orchard, and we ran out of tables this morning, and so there was no room for my sermon on the normal table. So I was kicking off the cobwebs of this table that we found in the back. How about that choir? Y'all give a hand to the choir. So we had all the men in the back, and Connor decided not to get the standard issue haircut that the rest of the men had. And we're all jealous. But we're continuing our Advent series. This is the fourth Sunday of Advent. Advent is the season that leads up to Christmas, and a lot of times we think of it as just the Christmas season, but historically it is a time where we're waiting. We're waiting for the story of Jesus. We think back to the way they were waiting for a Messiah, but we also look forward to the time where Jesus will return and make everything right. And so it's this time of we're kind of going through the story to try to get in the shoes of the people of Jesus' time, but we're also knowing that this world is broken. As much fun as we're having, we're enjoying Christmas lights and family and just the feel-good things that come around the Christmas season, we're also realizing that there's still so much violence, so much brokenness, so much hate, so much just dysfunction in our world, and we're waiting for Jesus to come and put that back. And so we're remembering the birth that changed everything, but the fact that when we say born is the King, we're saying that everything about human history changed when Jesus came into this world to show us how to live, and then dying for us to empower us to live that life. We're remembering the life that he's giving us. We're remembering that this world is broken, and we're waiting for restoration. And what we're really waiting for as we celebrate, as we talked about with the Advent candle lighting, is that this is the Sunday of peace. We're waiting for peace. And what we mean by peace is wholeness, this completeness. We're waiting for rest. We're waiting for true community. We're waiting for security. We're waiting for justice. We're waiting for an inner peace. So we want the outside things to be fixed, but we also know that there's things broken in the inside. We want inner peace. We want inner healing. We want just transformation. And then I think we also want awe. We want to recognize awe, A-W-E. We want to recognize who this God is and be overwhelmed by how much bigger he is than anything else that we have going on. And so I try to think when I was preparing the sermon of a story, an experience that might reflect some of this. And what I came up with was when I was in college, I worked at Camp Glisten, and they have different levels of camps. It was different back then than it is now, but back then, now it's like you have village, which is where you stay in these extremely fancy cabins, or outposts, which is where you live on like a platform tent, and you go out and do things like backpacking and kayaking. But anyway, back then they had three levels. It was village, which was not quite as fancy cabins. And then you had the platform tents, but then you had wilderness, which was you were just in the woods somewhere. And most of the time I was a village counselor because there's just a lot more need there. But I was like, hey, 1 week can I be a wilderness counselor? And the guy that directed wilderness said, sure, yeah, you can go backpacking. And see, what I thought was going to happen was that I would be with lots of other experienced counselors, and apparently I wasn't the only one that asked to do this one time. And so the guy that was directing it was like, hey, you four, you guys have never been backpacking. Well, you've been backpacking, but you've never led people in backpacking. The four of y'all are going to go do it. And so as a 20-year-old, I was like, okay, whatever. But I had no experience. And speaking of our hurricane relief, this wasn't nearly as bad as what happened this year, but there was a hurricane that had gone through, and we were getting the tail whips of it, and it was just drenching the North Georgia mountains. So it's the middle of July, and it rained so 5 days straight that we're backpacking. And it rained so much to the point that, of course, this is 2001-ish, so no digital cameras. Well, they might have digital cameras, but they were really expensive. But I had disposable cameras. I don't know if anybody under 25 knows what that is. But basically, you take a picture and you wind it up, you take a picture, you have no idea what your pictures look like until you take them to a stranger. And they're the first persons to see whether your pictures are any good or if you took pictures of anything strange. But anyway, I got to the point where I was taking out this disposable camera and taking pictures of the sun whenever it would peek out from behind a cloud. That's how desperate I was and how it just almost got depressing how much it rained. I remember the first night we're sectioning the Appalachian Trail. I think we ended up doing 30 or 40 miles in the 5 days on the Appalachian Trail. And the first time we camped into went into a camp area, like a campground area. and we ended up sleeping in like on picnic tables because it was the only covered shelter. And the first morning there was these crows at like 5 in the morning that were just, I don't know if you've ever heard a lot of crows when you're trying to sleep, and it wasn't like you were in your house. It was literally they were next to us just going, nah, nah. And I just remember getting around and running them off and trying to kick them while everybody else was sleeping. So we're doing this trail, and one of the counselors that they picked was this woman who was 4'10", and if you know anything about walking in the mountains when you're 4'10", you don't go very fast. And so we would hike for 3 or 4 hours at a time, and we would stretch out so far that the front group would have to sit down for an hour to wait for her to get there. And I experienced a lot of things. So also, if up near Blood Mountain, if you're familiar with up there in the North Georgia Mountain, there's a hostel, which is kind of a waypoint where you can go through, and they've got like beds that you can sleep in. We didn't sleep in the beds, but they did have dryers. And I'm sure we were not supposed to do this, but we took our whole boots and just threw them in the dryer. Because these were waterproof boots, but there was nothing waterproof about this trip. I mean, my backpack, I had every last item was in a Ziploc bag, in the bag with a rain thing over it, and it still got wet. And so, I mean, I'm sure the dryer, because we didn't bother to wash the stuff. We just dried our socks and our boots in the dryer and kept going. And I'm sure that was a horrible thing for those dryers. It sounded terrible. But it should have been miserable. And the way I'm describing it sounds miserable, but it was actually one of the most fun experiences of my life. The camp director, the wilderness director, his name was Quentin, and we called him Q. And so first of all, if you've got a person named Q giving you gadgets to carry out your mission, we all felt like James Bond out there in the wilderness. But, I had been camping. I had never been backpacking. I had been camping. I had seen mountains. But over and over again, as we went up the cliffs and got to the clearings and the different gaps to see the mountain, I was just overcome with how glorious creation is. And then just being in the wilderness and the quiet, disconnected from everything, got a lot of time to think and to pray, build community and trust with the teenagers that we were leading. Did a lot of other crazy stuff, like it's the only time I've ever been rappelling off a mountain face. Did real rock climbing, where you actually climbed up the side of a mountain with someone belaying you, and it was only like 15 feet. But we still had a rope in. It wasn't like I was doing something really cool. But it was the idea of like a life well lived. So this idea of what we're waiting for from God. When we're going through the chaos, but we know that we're being taken care of, where we experience community even in the midst of hardship, where we're seeing the majesty of God even as we go through normal life and rain and smelly stuff and bears attacking your bags in the middle of the night. Like, it was what I'm talking about. It's the peace that we're waiting for. And I guess there wasn't really any justice involved in the trip, but I felt like it was a microcosm of the adventure that we're waiting for from God. And so, okay, I'm done reminiscing. So let's read our passage and talk about the peace that God gives. This passage this morning comes from Micah chapter 5, verses 2 through 5. And Micah is one of the Old Testament prophets. And so if you're reading the Bible straight through, you've got the stories of Adam and Noah and Abraham and Moses. And then you get the Kings period, which is where, and I'm skipping stuff. You get the Kings period, which is where they created their own country and they had a monarchy and whatever. But at the end of that, these huge empires, Assyria, Babylon, Persia, come in and mess up everything. And the prophet books mostly are God talking to these individuals, these prophets, sharing what happened and what's going to happen to Israel during these really tumultuous periods where they're being run over by these empires. And so Micah is writing during the end of the Assyrian Empire, and so he offered a lot of judgment for the first 4 chapters. This is why it happened. And now he's offering the hope that we have in Jesus because of this. So, not in Jesus, but the hope that they're waiting for. We'll explain Jesus in a second. All right, verse 2. As for you, Bethlehem of Ephrathah, though you are least significant of Judah's forces, one who is to be a ruler in Israel on my behalf will come out from you. His origin is from remote times, from ancient days. Therefore he will give them up until the time where she who is in labor gives birth. The rest of his kin will return to the people of Israel. He will stand and shepherd his flock in the strength of the Lord, in the majesty of the name of the Lord his God. They will dwell secure, because he will surely become great throughout the earth. He will become one of peace. It's the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. So the background here is the Assyrian invasion. Assyria was this huge, really, really nasty empire. So you may think of the Roman Empire, and they could be nasty, but they also had this like civilized part of them where they were creating art and culture and all sorts of things. That's not the Assyrians. The Assyrians were a glorified barbarian horde. They prized nothing but violence. All of their art is just violence. It's just their king doing crazy things to people. You did not want to run into the Assyrians. In fact, it's probably worse to remain alive after the Assyrians come through than to be killed by them. I mean, I won't go into it, but when you read the book of Jonah and you understand why he wants God to destroy the Assyrians, that's Nineveh. Nineveh was their capital. It makes a lot more sense. This was a terrible, terrible group of people. But anyway, at this point, you've got Israel split into two countries. You've got Judah in the south and Israel in the north. Jerusalem is in Judah in the south. Israel in the north, both of them, I guess, stopped paying taxes or something. Made the Assyrians really mad because the Assyrians had already been like, hey, you're going to pay us taxes and we'll protect you because, that's how it works. Instead, if you don't pay taxes, we'll attack you. So they wiped out the entire northern kingdom, and then they started attacking the southern kingdom. And if you know the story of Hezekiah, it's a pretty cool story if you don't know it, they're about to attack Jerusalem. It's the only city left in Judah. And Hezekiah prays to God, and basically the entire Assyrian army gets wiped out by a plague, and they go home. We don't necessarily have a historical record of this, but we do know that the Assyrians walked away from Jerusalem and didn't attack them. And so something happened where God protected them. And so this is that promise that God's saying. So Micah explains how Israel's and Judah's brokenness leads to where they are. They turned away from God. They lost his protection. And that's just like our brokenness and other people's brokenness, how that causes pain and hurt in our lives. But the passage has this new promise. It says a ruler is going to come, and that it's going to come from Bethlehem. Now, to us, we're like, oh yeah, Jesus was born in Bethlehem. But the reason Bethlehem is important is because David was from Bethlehem. And so this is a promise that the king from the line of David, which God promised David that he would always have a descendant on the throne through all time. And so they're waiting for that Davidic king to come back and lead the people. And so that's what they're waiting for. And so that's how so we'll get more into that. But they want to return. It says the people will return because some people have been exiled, sent to Babylon, sent to Egypt, sent to not Babylon, Assyria, Egypt. They'll get sent to Babylon later and bring them back. He says it's going to strengthen the people in the strength of the Lord. It's going to bring security, bring peace. And so for the next 700 years, they get kings that sort of look like this. So this is before Hezekiah's come to power, or right as Hezekiah's in power. And so he's a Davidic king. He brings a semblance of peace. I mean, they repel the Assyrians. The Assyrians are gone for a little bit. But then another king, Hezekiah's grandson, Josiah, restores worship of the temple, the reading of the law. Then they get wiped out by the Babylonians, and when they come back, there's another Davidic descendant. When I say Davidic, David, in case y'all didn't catch that, Davidic, another descendant from the line of David, a guy named Zerubbabel. Everybody say Zerubbabel. A really fun name to say. He's another guy that comes and they say he starts bringing a little bit of the hope that they're waiting for, but then that kind of falls apart after a while. And then the Greeks move in after the Persians. So the Persians create a kind of like a little bit of peace for them because they let everybody worship however they want. So the Persians are kind of seen as the good guys, even though it's just another empire. But after the Persians come the Greeks, and they're not able to worship. And so a family named the Maccabees, and you've got Judah Maccabee, these leaders who are descendants of David, they lead another revolt. If you know the Hanukkah story, it's around, I think, like 400, 200 BC. And they restore it again. And so they're like, oh, this is the Messiah. But then everything falls apart again. Rome moves in. The Maccabees kind of pick sides with Greece against Rome, or the wrong, it's messy. Anyway, they end up with nothing again. The time of Jesus, you've got a guy who's not really even Jewish on the throne. Herod's not really even Jewish. And so they're still waiting for this person. So it's never complete. The gospel writers believe this points to Jesus. So we come to the New Testament, and they say, look at this verse. I think this is referring to Jesus. Now, that makes sense because they're saying, well, this is the Messiah. It's a descendant from David. But what's interesting about saying this applies to Jesus and everyone else is this: what happens in verse 2. So before we get to that, though, my camping trip was amazing because of awe, because I saw God, awesomeness, AWE. I feel like I could understand and see God's hand shaping the world because I had these huge, 50-mile views that I was looking out in the North Georgia mountains. And so I still remember staring at, and so that's where our peace starts in this passage. It starts with awe. So let's look at verse 2. This is what verse 2 says. As for you, Bethlehem of Ephrathah, I read that a lot of times. I forgot to pronounce it out loud. Though you are least significant of Judah's forces, one who is to be a ruler in Israel on my behalf will come out of you. So we got that, the David king, some guy coming from Bethlehem. But it says his origin is from remote times, from ancient of days. That's where we see, oh, wait a minute. We claim that Jesus is both God and man. No one would ever say of David, he's from ancient of times. He was just another normal guy, like any other guy that God picked. But what's different about Jesus, what's different about the Messiah that they're really waiting for, is that. And so there's a reason that the passage can only apply to Jesus. He's both God and man. It's the Ancient of Days come back. We don't need that verse yet. We're part of a story designed at creation where God allowed himself limitations to walk out of our brokenness. Think about that. Each one of us have got our individual lives. We all have our different problems, whether it's school or work or family or whatever it is. And when you write it down on paper and tell a whole bunch of people, it just seems like what everybody else has to go through. Or we may have, well, I've got the most things that I'm going through. Or maybe I've got the easiest life. But we're all called into a story that God was writing for all eternity, that involves the God of creation coming down into our midst, taking on our limitations to show us what life looks like, and then to take death on himself for us so that we could live a part of a world where we're helping put things back together by his power. We're called into this amazing story. And I look at that, and it's the same kind of awe that I get when I look at the mountains. And so if you spend a lot of time in worship, you spend a lot of time realizing who this God is. Think about every confusing thing you've ever learned, knowing not only does God know math, he invented math. Not only does God know science, not only does he know what's out there, not only does he know what happened in the past, he knows what happens in the future. He's helping write it. He's giving us a chance to bring our own free will into it, but at the same time, he's still working it all together, just trying to even grasp what that could even mean. Makes everything else not quite so important. And so that's where we are. So we can go to a passage like Ephesians 3:20 if you want to throw that up there. It says, glory to God who is able to do far beyond all that we could ask or imagine by his power at work within us. What can God do? We don't know. It's so much bigger than anything that we can ask for. So one thing they really wanted, though, was peace and security. Peace and security. So, like I said, we had this guy when we were hiking, the guy who ran it all, who did it every week and did it all the time. His name was, in fact, he's from Dahlonega, and his family owned cabins in the woods. And so, he just lived his whole life in the North Georgia mountains. His guidance, he taught, if you've never been on the Appalachian Trail, the white markers mean you're on the right path. The blue markers mean you can take that path to go find water, which was really important. And of course, he also was the one who gave us the things that would kill all the bacteria in the water so things didn't get really ugly as we're hiking the trail. There was guidance in the midst of all the rain and all the, hey, do we really know what we're doing out here? But we have to pretend like we do because all these teenagers are with us. This life will be tough and confusing. But with the Ancient of Days walking beside us, we can find the marks on our path. Now I'm talking about real life, not hiking. He'll give us the strength we need. He'll take our worst pains and he'll use them for good. He could take anything and turn it into something beautiful. He'll feed us when we're hungry. That could be real food. It could be community. It could be purpose. It could be justice. It could be peace. It could be rest. He offers those things to us. And so Jesus, gives us this verse in the end of the Sermon on the Mount. He says this in Matthew 7 of what we can do if we need these things from God. Ask and you will receive. Search and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives. Whoever seeks finds. And to everyone who knocks, the door is opened. Who among you would give your children a stone when they ask for bread? Or give them a snake when they ask for fish? If you who are evil know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your heavenly Father give good things to those who ask him? Therefore, you should treat people in the same way that you want people to treat you. This is the law and the prophets. So, what do we lack? What are we looking for? What aches did you come in with your heart? What confusion did you bring in here this morning? Just ask God. We have a Father in heaven who loves us as much and better than our earthly parents. If you had good earthly parents, you can compare them to that. If you didn't, you could say, well, I've got a heavenly Father to help heal that wound. But what do you lack? Think about it for a second. I'll give you a second. And ask God for it right now. I would write it down or text it to someone so that you remember when he does show up to provide you what it is you're looking for. So next, let's look at this passage. We can wait for peace in community. We can wait for peace in community. We're not doing this by ourselves. We live in a culture that is isolated. I mean, we championed individualism for, since the existence of our community. You want to be able to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We want to put in the hard work. We want to reap the rewards of how much effort we put in. And those aren't necessarily bad things. But what's happening now is that we don't trust any institution. We can walk away from anything at any moment's notice, any friendship, any group, if there's a disagreement. And what ends up happening is we're more and more isolated. It's interesting following college football this year. And I don't know why, I'm sure it's been happening for a long time, but it's interesting. Anytime, it used to be like, oh, we're all going to play this game, and we're going to follow the rules, and then we might begrudgingly celebrate the winner. But I have yet to see a football game, according to everyone's opinions, that has been lost fairly. I mean, I will say that I have made comments that say that, it was a bad call, and that made it, but I've never gone to the point where I was like, every single game we lost was rigged by Vegas. Vegas is responsible for everything wrong in sports every time my team's not doing right. And it's funny to say out loud, but what it is a breakdown of institution, whether it's real or not. I mean, we can say maybe it is a problem. I mean, sports gambling became a national thing in 2018. Maybe it is causing a lot of problems. But at the same time, we don't trust any authority whatsoever unless it's going our way. And that creates a lot of chaos, not just in sports, but in politics. Every election, if there's a deal that goes down that we don't like, or a legislation that goes through, there was some backhand deal. There was this, we can't. And what that's doing to us on an individual level is that we do that with our friendships. We do that with our schools. We do that with our communities. We do that with our churches. If you hear some of the crazy stuff that people have come up with about me, not here, y'all are great, but other places. But that's what we're disintegrating. And so we need community. Maybe we can be that. Maybe the church can be that because we have the power of God doing that. And so the people return from exile. That's what Micah is promising. He's saying, hey, y'all have been decimated as a community. There's people who you used to live next to that have gone a long way, have been forced. We're going to invite them back. Not only that, but it says in chapter 4 of Micah, or right at the beginning of chapter 4, that God is going to be drawing all nations to Jerusalem. Not only will it be a place where we restore the community we once had, but now all these new people will be invited in. And that's the hope that we don't see in Israel, but we do see in Jesus and the kingdom of God coming there. And so I may have had great community on a camping trip, but it's more than that, this hope that we're waiting for, this peace that we're waiting for, healed families, new people to come alongside us. And we can do something the world can't do. We can hurt each other, and then we can forgive each other. I can say the word cancel culture, and I think a lot of people have different opinions about that. But I think that when we think about cancel culture and what's wrong with it, we're upset about the wrong thing. Because usually people like cancel culture if somebody's getting canceled that you don't like. But we don't like it if we think that the person who did the thing didn't really do anything wrong. And that's usually where we get annoyed about cancel culture. But what's really broken about cancel culture is that no one can be forgiven. That's how it works. You're canceled, you're one and done. You made some racist comment on Twitter in 2005, you can never do anything good the rest of your life. You were mean to a dog, in high school. Like, no one can ever trust you again. You can't hold a job, you're worthless. That's what we're at. And that's just not the gospel. The gospel is whatever you came in here with, you can be forgiven, not just by God, but we can walk through it with you. Now, it doesn't mean that if you've done something to someone, you have to make it right. But it doesn't mean that you're worthless. And that's the problem with the culture now, is that there's zero forgiveness. Everything's public, and no one can be forgiven. And so, if you're hurting or lonely, ask for God's peace here. If you feel like you're too broken for community, ask for God's peace here. Jesus brings peace. We can find peace in Jesus in community, with people to walk alongside. We can find peace in your heart as we'll be like, oh, well, everything seems good in my life, but I'm hurting in here, and something's broken in here. God can bring peace there. He can bring peace in the world if you're looking around at all the broken things that we're seeing. I listen to a lot of podcasts. In fact, according to Spotify Wrapped, I listened to 18,000 minutes of podcasts last year. But I've been listening to a lot about Christmas right now as we're in this season. And they talk about, there's a debate with some of the people I listen to about Christmas songs. They say, like, I have a problem with certain, this is not me talking, this is some of the podcasters. I have a problem with certain Christmas songs. We'll take A Little Town of Bethlehem or Silent Night, because it doesn't show how crazy this time period was. Bethlehem, where Jesus was born, has been the center of political and military drama for thousands of years. It is center of it now. I mean, it's a Palestinian-controlled area that is in a lot of pain. Bethlehem, if one of the worst stories in the whole Bible, I don't even want to say what's in the story, but it's in the book of Judges. Something terrible happens at the book of Judges to a woman. That happens. She's from Bethlehem. Like, this is not a Silent Night kind of place. A little town of Bethlehem, I can't remember the words, but it's like, how sweetly we see thee lie. Like, that was not the experience for a bunch of people who were forced by the Roman Empire to migrate back to their hometown so they could pay taxes. But in our culture now, being able to sing a song like Silent Night in the midst of all the chaos going on out there, I think, and to argue with the podcasters I'm listening to, I think we need. Because we need a chance to have some kind of internal peace in our hearts. And so we can sing a song like that and realize, hey, we can have silence and peace in our hearts, even as everything else is falling apart around us. So we need peace. We need rest. We need security. We need justice. We need awe. We need purpose. We need a plan for our lives. And we can find that in the one that was born to Bethlehem, but was also the Ancient of Days, who will be a shepherd, who will bring peace, who will bring all of our community home and give us a new community. We wait for it, but we don't just wait for it. We wait actively. Because all of the hope that I'm offering you, all the rest that Jesus offers us, we need to turn around and go offer it to the world. Whatever we get, we offer to others, especially the unexpected. Think about the people that no one's paying attention to in your neighborhood. Think about the people who get on your nerves or you have the most strife with. Figure out how to forgive them, how to bless them, how to want good things for them. Figure out who that person is you're going to see over the next 3 days that you don't really want to see, and figure out how you can love them. What peace do you need? As we close, ask for it. Ask community for it. If you're lacking something, we're here together to lift each other up. Be brave enough to ask for it. What peace can you give? Look for your neighbors. Everyone's your neighbor. Who needs it? If you need some specific ideas, continue to give to our Christmas offering or for the ASP tree so that we can bless the hurting, our neighbors to the north, and find ways to serve this God. Let's continue worship, find that awe, and then ask God for peace.